There's a massive new piece of legislation out there, and it's called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It has sent some serious shockwaves through the political world. Today, we are going to put one of its most talked about, most controversial parts under the microscope: the huge changes it's making to Medicaid.
I mean, you know a bill is a big deal when it gets reactions like this one. Elon Musk called it a disgusting abomination. So what in the world is in this thing that could cause such an intense firestorm? Well, to really get it, you first have to understand just how enormous this bill really is.
Right, so before we can even talk about the Medicaid changes, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of the bill they're tucked inside of. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act is, well, it's a truly colossal piece of legislation. This is not a law that's just focused on one thing. Nope. It's what's called an omnibus bill. And you can think of it like this. It's a massive legislative container that packages a whole bunch of unrelated policies, everything from tax cuts to military spending to immigration, and rolls it all into a single all-or-nothing vote. And this really tells the story of the bill's priorities. I mean, you can just see it. Border security and defense spending, they make up almost all of the new money. They completely dwarf everything else in the bill. So let's look at the actual numbers, because they're pretty staggering. $150 billion. That's the new chunk of funding just for defense. And we're not talking about a small bump here. This is a massive injection of cash for huge projects like new naval ships and a whole new missile defense system. And then there's another $170 billion for border security. Now, to put that number into perspective, the goal here is to create the capacity to deport up to 1 million people a year. And get this, there's enough funding in there to make ICE the single most heavily funded federal law enforcement agency in the country. Okay, so with that massive spending as our backdrop, let's zoom in. We're going to go from that 30,000-foot view of the bill right down to a critical detail that's tucked deep inside: healthcare. And more specifically, Medicaid. So, quick refresher. What exactly is Medicaid? It's basically the foundational health safety net in the U.S. It covers a huge range of people, from low-income families to kids to the elderly and people with disabilities. It is an absolute cornerstone of the American healthcare system. And buried deep, deep inside this gigantic bill are changes that don't just tweak Medicaid. They fundamentally alter who can even get it. This is a really big policy shift, so let's break down exactly how it all works. So, how do these cuts actually play out? Let's get into the mechanics of it, looking at the specific rules written right into the law itself. The bill comes at the program from a few different angles. First, it hits pause on any new staffing standards for nursing homes. It also cuts back on retroactive coverage, which is a big deal for people who need help covering recent medical bills. And finally, it puts up a brand new hurdle for a lot of people to clear, something called community engagement. So this community engagement thing, it creates a whole new process. Under this law, a lot of adults now have to prove they're working, or in school, or doing some other approved activity for at least 80 hours every month. If they don't report it, a clock starts ticking. They get this 30-day cure period to get their paperwork in order, and if they can't, boom, they lose their health coverage. You can probably imagine a policy shift this dramatic was never going to go down quietly. But what's really interesting is that the fight wasn't just between the two major parties. It actually created some deep fractures inside the Republican Party itself. So the main conflict was happening internally. On one side, you had the fiscal conservatives, the deficit hawks, and they were pushing for even deeper cuts to get spending under control. But on the other side, you had moderate Republicans who were raising some serious red flags about how these changes would actually impact some of their most vulnerable constituents. And this is where things got really tricky, politically speaking. As analysts from NPR and other places pointed out, these cuts to Medicaid seem to directly contradict a major public promise not to touch the program's benefits at all. Now, from the other side of the aisle, critics like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put these Medicaid changes into the much broader context of the bill's other priorities. She argued that the absolutely staggering increase in funding for immigration enforcement, that it was a deliberate choice, made at the direct expense of the social safety net. Okay, so let's put all the political fighting aside for a minute. What are the real-world consequences supposed to be? What happens when these changes are actually implemented? Researchers started to model the potential effects, and, the results were pretty stark. 51,000.
Let that number just sink in for a second. This is the figure that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. A group of public health and policy researchers projected that the cuts in this bill could lead to over 51,000 preventable deaths. And not just once, but every single year.
And that pretty much brings us to today. The bill is now the law of the land, but this story is far from over. It really leaves us with a fundamental question about our priorities, right? When these massive, all-in-one bills package together border security, defense spending, and healthcare cuts, how do we even begin to measure the true cost? That's a question that's going to be answered in the years to come.